everybody, and welcome to The Split, the young adult book review podcast for readers and writers. I am Brian Cohen, the author of the Ted Saves the World series. That is Robert Scanlon, the author of the Dreamer Chronicles. And Robert isn't doing anything fancy, and I think I know why. I know, now Robert's crying. So we're a couple days late with this episode. And that's the first time in 60 episodes we've been a couple days late. And the reason behind Robert's crying and the couple days late is because we are stepping back from The Split, Robert and I.
Which is a sort of a diplomatic euphemism for closing the show down.
we are, well 100% we're stepping back.
Yes.
We are currently looking to see if anyone who would do as a job like us. I'm not going to say we do a good job. I'm just going to say a job like us.
Yes.
If we could get anyone to step up in our place and take over. But we are stepping back. Robert is ascending into heaven on the YouTube.
I know. Just going to deal with it.
But I know my reasons for stepping back. I've been really, really busy, and it's been tough to keep up everything. And I've kind of been of the opinion, well, I could do 5 or 6 things pretty well, or do 2 or 3 things good to great. And I have a lot of people who count on me, whether it be for writing fiction or doing Somewhere Book Show, and I just want to do my best for them. So, yeah, it's sad, but Robert and I have had a lot of fun with this.
It's sad and it's happy at the same time, in the sense that there are many people who start podcasts who get no further than episode 2 or 3. And you know, we've read 60 books. We've put a lot of work into thinking about how this affects our own writing and how it affects our enjoyment of a book and what makes a good story, and you know how things get picked up for movies. Why does a book become popular even when you think it's not that well written? And so I think, you know, that's been a really great experience. So I'm certain that there's been enjoyment for others for those 60 episodes as well. And we're sad to leave you with just the 60 for the moment, but you never know. You never know. It's entirely possible that even some of the authors who've been listening to this show, whose books we have reviewed, are just ready to step up to the plate.
It's possible. Anything is possible.
Yeah. But we're going to do something a bit special in this one, aren't we?
We are. In the spirit of Brian not having enough time, I didn't read 2 books that Robert is going to review today. And Robert, what is the first book you would like to cover?
It's Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and it's her 3rd book, I believe, and she'd written 2 young adult books prior to this, and this one is billed on a list somewhere as young adult, and I think it probably is really in its style, although some of the protagonists in it's set over various different time periods. In fact, both of the books that we're reviewing today have that aspect to them, which is quite unusual, and that can be quite tricky as well as a reader and a writer to manage. And so in one of the time periods that there's certainly not the YA age protagonist that you would expect. They're in their 20s. Actually, they're in their 30s, I think. But because it keeps flashing back to when they were at college, I think there's enough there. And there are other young characters. So yeah, it's a really interesting book, as you'll find out. Do you want me to? You're going to grill me about this book, I think, because
I'm going to grill you. It's going to be awesome.
You're going to want to know all about it.
Yeah. So go summarize it, and then I will pick apart your summary. No,
yeah, that's right. You are the summary man. Okay, this is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Victor and Eli were college best friends. Were being the operative word. What was the horrible supernatural discovery that got in the way of their friendship and turned them into lifelong and deadly enemies? And why did they both have to die to discover it? Vicious tells the story of two once inseparable friends who became sworn to the death enemies and the growth of the EO, or extraordinary humans with extra powers. Vicious is by V.E. Schwab. It's a pacey read as well. You know, it had some difficulties as a reader, but overall, I really liked it. The reviews are a bit mixed, mostly positive, I have to say, mostly positive. But those who didn't like it probably didn't like it for the reasons that I would raise later. But yeah, it's an interesting story, and there are multiple points of view as well in this one, Brian. So it's you're hopping around all over the place.
If you were going to recommend this to an author, and their qualification was, what am I going to learn from this book? Number one thing I'm going to learn. What would that thing be?
Very good question. How to slowly reveal your cards over time, so that the mystery continues to unpack itself. And I think that's a function of two different things in this book, maybe three. For a start, you continually are at the college era where they're discovering all this stuff, and then suddenly you're flashing forward to 10 years later. And then you're also flashing back to 2 weeks before the 10 years later, where there's a lead up to some momentous thing that's going to bring these two enemies, sworn enemies, together. So there's the impending conflict always in the background, but that's only in the kind of 10 years in the future thing. The 10 years in the back thing is setting up how they discovered all this, and then all of the sort of narrative in between. And we don't really hop into, say, 5 years previous. It's mostly just way back, and then more or less 10 years now. There's a few other bits. There's bits of backstory that get filled in. But as the book progresses, they have to discover where these other EOs or extraordinaries are coming from. And it's not really giving away a spoiler, I don't think, to say that in the very beginning of the book, the premise is that they discover that people who have had a near-death experience or have died and come back, say from the operating table or because somebody gave them CPR or whatever, if they had a passion to live again, that they were desperate to live again, then they came back with additional powers, and it was unpredictable. None of them have the same type of power. So Victor can take away pain, and which is fantastic because there are parts of the book where that's actually used as a plot device, which is very clever.
Yeah. Nice.
And Eli can heal himself indefinitely, so you can just shoot the guy in the chest repeatedly, and he'll just, even though there's a big pool of blood forming on the floor, the holes will just close over as you're doing it. It affects him. He gets he gets physically weak from it temporarily, but he'll be back. So and Victor wants to kill Eli, and he knows that he's basically almost unkillable, almost. But you get these others that come in with the power. There's Eli's sidekick who has, I won't give it away because it's not fair, who has a really interesting power that's not necessarily physically related, and so those cards don't get played all at once. You get to find out about them gradually. There's a lot of curiosity and a lot of mystery, and then combined with the fact that you're always hopping forward and hopping back, you're piecing together slowly the pieces of two different jigsaws at the same time. And as a reader, that can be a little frustrating. So it starts out in the middle of everything, right in a graveyard, which is fantastic. It's a really good start. It's quite a dark book. It's quite gory. Vicious is an apt name. This is not your love triangle, although there is a bit of a love story in there.
That is something I was going to ask about, because obviously it seems like the number one thing is between the two friends, which is a little bit the dynamic, but obviously not the same, of Grasshopper Jungle, where the friendship is more important than the relationship. And so many of the books we've read have been about the relationship, where that's been the major impetus. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see a book, not take the easy way out necessarily, the easy genre convention.
Yes, there's definitely nothing well, I don't think there's much conventional about this in terms of YA reads, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Possibly in terms of horror and supernatural, there's some stuff in there where you've got the guy who experiments and turns supposedly evil. But you actually don't really know Eli's motivation, although he's the antagonist, is quite well portrayed. You know, he's become extraordinary, but it's clear early on in the book he's on a mission to dispatch the world of all the extraordinaries because he believes it's against God's will that humans have these powers. And very, very early in the book, there's a tragic accident, and this is part of the sort of backstory love story. That means that one of them has a big grudge against the other, which is never going to go away. So that fuels the enemy thing, as well as Eli's determination that Earth should not have human beings like this, and he sees himself as given the mission of getting rid of them all. So it's
fun times.
Yeah, it's clever. And there are some good surprises. It's pretty scary in places. It's quite gory. Definitely not for the younger reader. I'd say 15 plus. And what you get from the reviews as well, which I would agree with, is, well, I didn't particularly like all the hopping around. There's lots of, I wouldn't call it head hopping, but there's lots of POV hopping within the same chapter even. And it was slightly too much for me if I was an editor. But as a reader, I got used to it. And okay, well, this is the structure of this story. And you know, so be it. It was interesting. It was pacey and tense enough that it kept you going. And what was I going to say? Oh yes, and so it's pretty dark. It's and every character is flawed. There's really only one likable character, and she kind of comes into it late in the piece, but she plays a big part. So later.
What book of the ones that we've read so far would you most liken it to, or is it completely different?
It's probably got some similarities to, say, something like The Immortal Rules, which you didn't read, but one of our guest hosts read with me. So that definitely has that's a vampire book, but it has that same sort of dark. But it is dystopian though.
It made me think of Poison Princess a little bit, describing it with the time jumping.
Yeah, I think it's again, if you took away the dystopian setting, then the darkness and destruction elements of it. But we're living in an all Earth, and it reminded me more of a Neil Gaiman sort of type story of, or even Stephen King. So yeah, I think if you like Stephen King horror, you'd like this. It's not quite the same elaboration that you get from Stephen King. But it's got fast-paced action that you would get out of, say, Poison Princess. So I think that's a pretty good arrow to draw there.
You're sitting down with the author for a cup of tea, and the author asks you, I want your help rewriting this book. What are your 3 ideas for taking this to the next level?
I'd say, number one, we could write it as 2 books. So we could actually have a very unusual premise. So we could have Vicious Victor and Vicious Eli. And the one book would be written all from Victor's point of view, and the other book would be written all from Eli's point of view. So a little bit kind of like the Twilight thing, where eventually the book comes out from Edward's point of view or whatever. So I think that would be really, really interesting. I think it'd be really a hard book to write as an action book, where as a reader you're privy to some of the growing suspense because you see the antagonist point of view. But as we know from Red Rising, where everything is from Darrow's point of view, you can still have remarkable conflict and tension from that single person point of view. And I just think it takes an awful lot of effort from the author to do that. So that's one thing I'd say. I think the next thing I'd say is we probably need a better save the cat moment at the start, so that people who won't put up with an unlikable main character find at least one reason to identify with them.
Yeah.
And it's almost there, but it needs to be. It's a little trivialized, and I think it could be better. Maybe she was afraid of making Victor too nice.
Yeah.
Because he's not a nice protagonist.
Nice.
So that's the second thing.
Number 3.
Number 3, there's a little bit of telling, I think, in this. It may be maybe it's because we get the continual time period hopping. So yeah, a minor cleanup. Maybe don't have so many forwards and backwards. It'll be challenging. Part of the story's premise is the unfolding story of what really did happen 10 years ago that caused these guys to split.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah,
Nice.
that's a really good question. Yeah, it's a really good question.
I'm full of them. I'm full of them. Are there any last things you'd like to say about this book before we move on to the second book?
Yeah, I think that it's a really good take. I've got some takeaways actually, so it's probably a natural move into that. I think it's a really great take on a best friendship and professional jealousy that sours. And these boys, when they were in college, was both super smart. You know, they were standouts in their topics of the sort of research that they were doing into various biological things, and you know their progression and evolution into dangerous paranormal enemies. You know, that's a really nice premise and simple. And the supporting characters, which I haven't talked about at all, are fantastic.
Yeah.
So there are two. They both got a side. Victor's got 2 sidekicks, and Eli ends up with one, I think. But they both end up with a string of others along the way as well, and they're all really interesting, you know, because we're discovering these other EOs that have these powers. So yeah, I'd recommend it, Brian. You know, well, definitely, you know, when you're on a vacation and in need of a book, definitely go for it.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, and I like the way that the revelations about the powers they weren't set up with the mission. So let's say they were able to identify, I won't give it away, they're able to identify where an EO might be. But unlike Harry Potter style writing, where we found another EO and this one's got the skill of rising up into the air suddenly and then teleporting into a different city. We need them. We must go find them. You know, so you already know, it's already revealed. This is not like that. It's like there's an EO. He's hanging in a bar, and we don't really know what he looks like. So everyone just be on the lookout. We don't know what his power is. So you know, it's really interesting. So
There's a little more mystery to it.
Yeah, a lot more mystery, and I thought that was really nicely done. So there you go, Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I would give it 5 stars. It has its flaws, but not enough for me to knock it back. So yeah, it was a fun read.
Very cool. Thank you for reading it, Robert.
Do you have any more questions?
I'm ready for the second book.
Let me take a drink. Second book. Now, you're going to hate the fact that you didn't read this, and you're going to have to read this book.
Okay.
I'll give you The Sun, which is by Jandy Nielsen. And and if while I'm reading the summary, if you get a chance to jump on Amazon and have a look at the number of accolades that this book received in 2014, you'll see, you'll get motivated to read it immediately. So
I'm checking it out.
So here we go. Jude and Noah, 13 when the story begins, are twins. And like most twins, they share a secret language and an almost telepathic mutual understanding of their deepest desires, their frustrations, and their darkest fears. But it all goes horribly wrong when the totally cool Brian shows up, and the twins' mother is killed in a horrible car accident. And Noah and Jude are forced to confront the fact that not everything in their history is accurate, not everything that they both wish for will be possible in this new world, and that they have already begun to walk a dangerous path by lying to each other. If you can't tell your best friend the truth, then how real will your life ever be? First love, confusion, desire, friendship, standing up for yourself. These are all mere bumps in the road when it comes to the whirlwind that is about to hit Noah and Jude. This is, I'm even getting goosebumps thinking about
It
this.
floored you?
Oh, it was lovely. Lovely and brutal. And it most reminds me of All the Bright Places. Is it
That's what I was thinking of when you described it.
It has that intensity of the relationship between the twins. There are not four of them, the twins. And it has similar themes of coming of age and who am I? I mean, it's totally YA. It has very adult references to sex and drugs, quite limited swearing. I think there is actually one F word, if not more, but most of the time they use EFFING, effing. So, but the what would make it for the older YA reader is the references to sex and drugs for sure. And there are. It's not explicit, but it's very clear what's going on. But it is a story about teens trying to make sense of themselves. Admits what are really personal events. I mean, really personal events. Very raw, very brutal, very huge betrayals of not just between the two, but they're not necessarily because they've turned evil. It's because there was something broken in their heart that made them betray something, and it's so clever. It really is, and it's not just the one thread. There's about 4 or 5 threads going through it as well. So you really get caught up in everybody's story. What's Brian's story? What's Jude's story? I mean, Jude and Noah's story is fairly clear, but then there are all these supporting characters, and what part do they play, and what's broken about them that's made them act this way? Almost everybody's kind of broken in some way, and but not in an unpleasant way, in a way that makes you want them to sort it out, because they're desperate to sort it out, and it's wonderful, and it's unusual as well because the principal, there are 2 love stories, but the principal love story is not your normal YA love story. It is has I won't give it away because I don't think it's fair. Just has elements of Grasshopper Jungle in it for those who are aware of that book. So it's a bold, courageous book. It has almost every single issue stirred into it. The death of a parent, the splitting up of parents, unrequited love, requited love that can't be, people whose goals get thwarted by the betrayal of somebody else, best friends who fall out, manipulating bullies who want to interfere in your life, school life that's a bummer because you don't fit in. It's got everything.
Here's a question. So you say I would like it. A lot of people would like it. Who needs to read this book? Who would be an example of someone who needs to read this book immediately?
I think any 15 or 16-year-old who's worried that they're not normal. And that would be wonderful. It's a piece of fiction, I think, that would give you faith that being not normal is a normal part of growing up. And I think also adults who are concerned about their teen not fitting in and whether to tell them the truth or not, or how much truth to tell, or whether their actions in trying to do the best thing for them are actually the best thing for them. I think it really pushes a lot of buttons in that respect. I think anyone who loves a story, who needs to read this, anyone who both loves a story that is about giving up on your deepest wishes, desires, and not just doing that one thing that would have made it all right. So I suppose, in a way, it's sounding more like a personal development self-help book.
That's okay.
Which is okay, yeah. It's romantic, but it is a lot of heartache. So I think anyone who identifies with heartache would love the book. Who needs to read it? people struggling with heartache and wanting to identify with characters, and look, let's face it, there are things in here that are tragic, but the book doesn't in any way, when you finish it, leave you with a lack of hope. So I wouldn't say there's a Hollywood ending, because that's not fair. But yeah, it's going to give anyone who's hurting or had difficulties with love or growing up in not realizing where they fit in, or not wondering if they should say something when they should have, that I think it would give them a great deal of comfort, because there is hope. So yeah, pretty deep, huh?
Real deep. You're teaching a course called Blank 101 on writing craft.
Yep.
And this book is in the required reading for one of the units you'll be teaching. What is the blank? Blank 101.
Voices.
Voices. Okay, yes. Explain.
It's told from two different points of view. So we get Noah's and we get Jude's, and we actually skip between Noah at 13, well, both of them at 13, and then both of them at 16. And in fact, it varies. You get Noah at 13 and a half, and there are small time jumps within that period. But what's beautiful about this is that Noah he's an artist, and he's very sensitive. But he's not. It sounds like a cliche. In a way, it is. But you never really think that when you're reading him. But his voice is so strong that he's forever kind of meta painting in his head whenever he's in a situation. So he's with Brian, and they're on the roof gazing at the stars, and Brian turns to look at him with the telescope in his head, and he sort of goes, "Oh, flash, portrait, Brian," and the glow around the scope. He's forever capturing everything in his head, and it's part of his voice, and it's a part of how you identify with how he processes the world.
Yeah.
Jude, on the other hand, is convinced that there's something wrong about her that is screwing everything up, and that she's fated to have a bad time in life, and she has her grandmother's, inverted commas, Bible with little quotes from her grandmother, which are just hilarious. I've got one of them here. And so they come in as italics, and actually very early on in the book you realise that she sees her dead grandmother, and talks to her out loud. It's hilarious. So there are some really funny moments in here. So one of them here. It's written in italics in the book. If bad luck knows who you are, become someone else. And so they're all timed to whatever's going on. And sometimes she reads it or thinks it, and then she sees her grandmother there, who's kind of staring at her and says, "Well," and so it's really, really clever. And so her voice and her way of processing the world is in using her grandmother's antiquated advice, kind of kitchen table advice. And in fact, in the author notes at the back of the book, Jandy Nelson says some of it's compiled from a reference book she had. Some of them are made up, So they're all kind of these little pithy aphorisms that just sort of make you think about life. But they're poignant to whatever scene it is, and sometimes they're quite deep, actually. And you really think, yeah, too true, So there's some great turning points. So I think if you were to want to study this book on a writing course, then Voices would be a brilliant one, and they're not the only one who has voices. So they're the voices that we experience, their POV, but of course there are all the supporting characters, and they have very clear voices as well, even though we're never in their heads. So I think this is a writer who understands how to differentiate.
What book that we've read would you consider the polar opposite to this book?
But that's probably the polar opposite to everything. The Selection. Well, but probably The Selection, because here we've got fate throwing people together in an unusual way. In I'll Give You the Sun. And maybe with unexpected feelings. And you could say the same of The Selection. Fate has thrown the protagonist, the main characters together, with unexpected feelings arising. So in a way, the theme is the same, but the way it's executed is a polar opposite. And one is a wild roller coaster of emotions, and the other one is a really bad cookie, So don't hold back. Don't hold back, Snobbit.
Your love of the selection.
Good question, though. Good question.
Oh, thank you. What are your takeaways from reading this book?
Yes. A lead into the takeaway, and it kind of leads into my first takeaway, is some of these, if you remember reading The Fault in Our Stars, I think one of the comments were that the parents were a little cardboard. And there are no soft and delicate, insipid parents in this story. This is really real, raw, and honest. And I think for that reason, my first takeaway is a kind of a wow. This is a coming of age story with wonderful intricacies and heartache and flawed parents even as well, who seem very real to me. And so I love that it wasn't just all about Jude and Noah. By no means. So, and it's something even that, even at my age, I'm sounding really old. I'm not that old, but
even at my age.
Yeah, that's right. Even though I'm a long way removed from being a teenager, there were plenty of relationship moments in this that caught me, and I loved it for that reason. I will reread. Second takeaway. Shall I go? It's a really well written piece of fiction that shows how, even with the best of intentions, things can go sour in a second if we withhold the emotional truth of our lives. And how deep is that? And to be able to put that into
real deep.
Yeah, and to be able to put that into a well crafted and tense story, where there's no action. I mean, there's a fight sequence, and this is not an action thriller where they've got to go and superheroes have got to go and fight the bad villain and clean up the world, a la Steelheart. It's nothing like it. So if there was a polar opposite in terms of what the story's about, you'd probably say the Brandon Sanderson stuff, because that's just comic book romp, that and Legend.
Yeah.
Well told, brilliant books, wonderful books, good fun. And this is good fun for a different reason, because I think it just takes you on a ride, and you just wish for the best for these characters. And my third takeaway is I think there's some fantastic scenes. The way that she conjures imagery and settings in the same way as the Scorpio races. So with just a few words here and there, we don't get the descriptions are part of the unfolding scene as opposed to setting the scene. And so I think that's another reason why authors can read this and the Scorpio races to get an understanding of how the story threads through the setting as opposed to the setting being a deliberate part of the story. And I love that. There are some sculptures in here, for example, that are part of the story, because they're both artistic. Both Noah and Jude are both artistic in their different ways. And there's a moment where one of them goes into the studio where there are these statues being sculpted, and it's not a lengthy description of them, but it's enough for you to immediately be transported into this sort of quite warehouse style thing with these very imposing and quite dark sculptures. So really, really nicely done. And I gave a bonus takeaway. What's the problem that we have with angst in these YA books?
I don't know. I think normally we find that it's cliche and we get really annoyed by the same exact depiction of it over and over again.
Right, exactly. So you get this the whiny angst. Yeah, so exactly. So this was me as well. I think Nelson, I think, represents teenage angst with such an authentic voice, where the angst hits your gut, and it doesn't. It's not an annoying nerd or a princess with an attitude, but it's a real person with fears and hopes and secrets. And for that, this was another book where I made a note to myself, I couldn't write this book, like a Red Rising. So I think whenever you, as an author, you think I couldn't write it, then there's something really special that for most readers. I can't think of anybody who necessarily wouldn't like it, except maybe young boys who want an action book, and it's not pitched to them.
No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be.
So this is definitely one to put on the list, Brian. You'll
All right.
You'll really like it.
I will.
And I think also it will give you some, because you've got quite a cast in your Ted Saves the World series as well. I think it would be another book that would give you some not ideas, because you have those. Another way of reflecting how relationships pan out.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's in the mental list.
It's mental.
So,
it's mental, mate. It's mental.
It's mental, mate. Yeah. So that's the end of the show. We like we said, we may try to find some new folks to pick up the reins from us, but Robert, you mentioned this off the air that we should pose a question to folks in these 60 episodes. Our question of the week, really, no one really ever responded to our prompts of the week, so those were kind of a dud. But
not that we know of. There might be bestsellers out there this very moment that are based
don't know
off one of your prompts.
We don't know that for sure, but it's probably not true. So what are your biggest takeaways that you've learned? And this isn't to Robert, this is just to the world. What are the biggest takeaways you've learned from these 60 episodes, and how will you apply them to your writing? So I think everybody should think about that, because something I've been doing lately, I've been journaling every morning. I've been writing down ideas.
Oh, nice.
And I'm trying to once a week go back and not just write these ideas down and forget about them, but put these ideas into my schedule, actually apply them. And I think that's something we sometimes fail to do with writing craft. We learn the good ideas. We have a lot of things that, whether we're learning from a novel we're reading or from a class at a workshop, we don't necessarily make space to apply them. So what have you learned from the split so far, or ever, because we don't know if it's continuing? But what have you learned, and when will you apply it? Because if you don't make an effort to apply it, you're just going to forget about it. So
that's an excellent question.
I'd like everyone to answer it. Take it away. Do it.
Yes, that is very true, because part of the love of reading and writing is continuing to evolve, and the message to every author usually is, make your next book the best one that you've ever written. I know you and I both have that philosophy of either you always think that your latest book is the best thing, and the first thing that you wrote is the worst, and that just seems to be the path of every author.
And as long as we keep getting better every time.
That's right. And I do think there are, with having done these 60 odd now, there have been some clear messages to the YA audience that, I don't think, the ones that we've disliked have probably been the ones that have just gone, okay, well, this is the YA trope, I'll write to it. Those that seem to have been better than that have surpassed a trope by giving us something extra. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be that high concept premise.
Yeah.
Of, wow, this is a really different and original idea, because I really do truly believe, like Austin Kleon promotes and Picasso, that every artist steals. It's what they do. And so in a way, with these 60 episodes, what you and I write from now on, we'll be stealing from those, because there are things that we've loved and we think, now stealing is not copying or plagiarizing. Stealing is saying, I want to make what they've done a part of my psyche too. So, with I'll Give You the Sun, those authentic voices, whoa, I have to find a way to portray that level of rawness. And it's not because she's using big words or anything. It's because there's some identification in there. So, you could easily use, say, improv or hat wearing or some method acting thing to get better into the voice of your character, as opposed to just sitting there and kind of churning it out. And so journaling maybe is a good way of doing that. You could start, I'm going to do a journal as my main character every day, and how does that give me a stronger voice? I also think that the message still comes through quite strongly that the classic story structure is still really important. You need an inciting incident. You need a good premise. You need a denouement that makes sense according to not necessarily just the inciting incident, but certainly the premise. You don't want to be heavy-handed with your themes, because otherwise you get the angsty teen thing coming through all the time. And so some of the classic writing craft, I think, is clear. It doesn't matter what the genre is. It's a story has elements that human beings enjoy, and it's rare that a really good book will be a really good book without some of those elements.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we went over a lot of things that we've learned during our year recap show in episode 50, I believe it was. Yeah. And I definitely recommend that people go back and check that one out, because there are so many things that we've gone over, and that I mean, I've been working on TED 5 recently, and I'm just so happy that I've been able to do this show, because it's really benefited my writing for sure.
It lends it. I'm really looking forward to getting back to doing some fiction again because of that. Exactly because of that. Because I feel fired up. I feel invigorated. And this is one of those classic things. And say, if you're not reading, then you can't be a writer. And I don't think there are many authors who would disagree with that. It's just that sometimes you feel like you're not finding the time. And I'm a voracious reader anyway, but this show has made me really focus down to get my to keep up with the volume of not just these books but others that I wanted to read along the way. I've been wanting to keep up with things like The Girl on the Train and The Martian, and the big books that come out that you want to read. And you hear, why is this big? And actually, that's a bit wrong. I want to read it for the enjoyment of the read first.
Oh, of course. Yeah. So, but you can do both.
You can do both, yeah. And I think that's another thing that this has taught me, is being able to read a book for enjoyment and at the same time have half an eye on what's made it great. And to some degree, I think occasionally that spoils a book, where you just want to...
Sure.
So, part of what I'm looking forward to post-show is just reading something. And not because I have to write some notes so that Brian and I can do the show.
Exactly. Well, this has been The Split. I'm Brian Cohen, the author of the TED Saves the World series. Go out and get it. There's 4 books in the series, 5th one coming, and a prequel novella. That's Robert Scanlon, the author of the Dreamer Chronicles. 3 books out, right?
Yeah, there are 3. The first book is free.
And the first one's free. Go pick that up.
It's the worst. So if you like that one, they only get better from there.
Oh yeah, I'm the same. Thank you everybody for listening. This has been awesome. And obviously, if new episodes pop up on here, you'll know that we've found someone to keep the split going.
Indeed.
Boo-hoo-hoo.
Boo-hoo. And so,
thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Brian.
Always has been fun.
It's been lovely for the friendship to continue not on just on air but off air as well. In our
agreed.
So that's not going to change. I'm sure people will still be hearing from Brian and I. And who knows?
Oh yeah,
we may pop up somewhere else. When I'm hoping that when Brian's movie comes out, that I will be invited. So I'd even
definitely be invited.
Jump on a plane for that. I'll even dress up
I'll
as
spring
Ted.
50% for the ticket from Australia, because we have to split it.
Boom boom.
Boom boom. Thank you everybody for listening, and go check us out on thesplitbookreviews.com for all our previous episodes. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Our email addresses still work, so if you still want to say hi, keep in touch. You know where we are.
Thank you guys for watching. Somewhere on this page is a subscribe button to the Split channel. We do reviews every week. We would love it if you followed us every single week. Isn't that right, Robert?
That's exactly right. Follow us now. Hit the subscribe button.